The crystal chandeliers of the Chicago Peninsula Ballroom cast a cold, sharp light over 200 guests in tailored suits and designer silk. Champagne flowed like water, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and corporate ambition. I sat at table 14, tucked away in the far corner near the service entrance, sharing space with people my family barely remembered to invite. I was 32 years old, and for the first time in a decade, I was wearing a black Valentino dress that I had bought with my own hard-earned money. Across the room, my father, Arthur Evans, stood on the stage. At 65, he was the picture of old money authority, a man who had built an empire on logistics and broken promises. Beside him stood Victoria, his second wife, her smile as perfectly fixed as her Botox, and Julian, her son, who wore a $5,000 suit and the arrogant expression of a man who had never been told no. Arthur took the microphone, his voice carrying that practiced, honey-like warmth that had fooled the world for 40 years. He thanked his partners, he thanked his mentors, he even thanked God. Then came the family segment. He spoke of Victoria's saint-like patience. He spoke of Julian, the brilliant future chief executive officer who would lead the Evans legacy into a new era. The room erupted in a standing ovation for the golden boy. Then, the spotlight swung. It cut through the shadows of the corner and landed directly on me. I felt 200 pairs of eyes turn, their gaze heavy with curiosity and a lingering, inherited contempt. Arthur's smile did not falter, but his eyes, they went cold. "And of course," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a tone of mock fondness, "my daughter, Elena." He paused, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. The girl who proved that even with the best education money can buy, some investments just never yield a return. A few people chuckled. Arthur leaned into the microphone, his grin widening. No degree. No real career. Just a professional at spending the family's grace. He gestured toward my table. "But hey, at least she showed up tonight. Maybe one of you bachelors in the front row can take her off my hands before she costs me another 10 years of tuition." The room erupted. It was not a polite laugh. It was the roar of a crowd that felt they were in on a brilliant joke, unaware they were witnessing a public execution. Beside me, a woman I did not know whispered to her husband, "So that is the disappointment they talk about." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I sat perfectly still, my spine as straight as the skyscrapers outside the window. I watched my father bask in the laughter he had created at my expense. And then I stood up. The laughter died down, replaced by a confused, static-filled silence. I picked up my champagne glass slowly, deliberately. My father's smile faltered for the first time. He expected me to hide. He expected me to run. I raised the glass toward the stage. "Congratulations on 30 years. Arthur," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and loud enough to be picked up by the microphone he was still holding. "You have taught me everything I know about business. You taught me about sacrifice and exactly what kind of loyalty one can expect from blood." The silence was absolute now. I could hear the ice clinking in a glass 3 tables away. "So, here is to you." I lifted the glass higher, a glint of something sharp in my eyes. "Cheers. This is the last time any of you will ever see me." I did not drink. I set the glass down on the white linen tablecloth with a soft, final clink. I picked up my bag, turned my back on the stage, and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor. The only sound in that cavernous room. I did not look back. Not at Arthur's graying face. Not at Victoria's shocked expression. Not at the 200 people who finally realized they were not looking at a failure. As the heavy oak doors closed behind me, I stepped into the cool Chicago night and took my first real breath in 12 years. Arthur thought he had just put me in my place. What he did not know was that he had just signed the death warrant for his own company, because the disappointment he had just mocked was the only person currently keeping his empire from falling apart. The hum of my Tesla's motor was the only sound as I drove away from the glittering lights of the Chicago Peninsula. Behind me, the city skyline looked like a jagged crown of diamonds, but to me, it felt like a cage I had finally broken open. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind? My mind was already miles away, drifting back through the years, peeling back the layers of a life that had been defined by silence. To understand why I walked out of that ballroom, you have to understand the house I grew up in. The Evans estate in Lake Forest, a 6-bedroom colonial, sprawling across 3 acres of manicured lawn, with a Mercedes always idling in the driveway. From the outside, it was a postcard of American success. Inside, it was a museum of cold surfaces and hollow echoes. My mother died when I was 8. It was cancer. Quick, brutal, and efficient. I barely remember her face without looking at photographs, but I remember her hands. They were soft, always smelling of lavender and old books, always reaching for mine. When she died, the warmth in the house died with her. My father, Arthur, did not mourn. He simply reorganized. Grief was a messy emotion that did not fit into his spreadsheets. 2 years later, Victoria arrived. She did not walk into our lives. She colonized them. She came with Julian, her son from a previous marriage, who was 3 years older than me. Within months, they were not just part of the family. They were the family. I did not become a Cinderella. There were no rags or chores. It was something much worse. I became furniture. I was a lamp in the corner, a painting on the wall, useful when noticed, but mostly just there. I learned the art of invisibility early on. I watched as Julian got the praise for his mediocre grades, while my straight-A report cards were tucked into a drawer without a word. I watched as Julian got a brand new BMW on his 16th birthday, while I was handed the keys to his old, dented sedan. It was not about the money. It was about the message. He is the future. You are an afterthought. But I had a secret. I had a plan. I was 20 years old, a sophomore at the University of Chicago, majoring in business and logistics. I had a 3.9 grade point average, a burning ambition, and a vision of a world where things moved faster, smarter, and more efficiently. I did not want my father's money. I wanted his respect. I thought if I worked harder, if I became the best, he would finally look at me instead of through me. The betrayal happened on a rainy Wednesday in October. My father called me home for a family meeting. Those words usually meant Julian had crashed another car, or Victoria wanted a new wing added to the house. I found them in Arthur's study, a room that smelled of expensive mahogany and expensive lies. Arthur sat behind his desk. Victoria stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder like a queen consort, and Julian lounged in a leather chair, looking bored. "Elena," my father began, not looking up from his papers. "We need to make some sacrifices as a family. Julian has been accepted into an elite Master of Business Administration program. It is a specialized, fast-track track that costs, well, it costs significantly." My heart rate did not change. I already knew where this was going, but I did not want to believe it. "And?" I asked, my voice thin. "And," he continued, finally meeting my eyes with a gaze as cold as a winter lake, "we have decided that we cannot afford to fund both of your educations at this level. Since Julian is the one who will eventually take over the company, we have decided you will take a break from school. Just for now." The room went silent. I could hear the rain tapping against the window like 1,000 tiny hammers. "A break?" I whispered. "I am in the top 5% of my class. Dad, I have a scholarship application for a London exchange program sitting on my desk right now. Victoria stepped forward, her voice dripping with that honey-sweet poison. Oh, Elena, sweetie. A girl does not really need a high-level business degree to have a good life. You will find a nice husband someday. That is what really matters for a woman in our circle. Think of it as a gift. You are being relieved of the pressure. I looked at Julian. He was smiling, a small, cruel twist of the lips. He knew. He had always known. You promised, Mom, I said, my voice trembling for the only time in my life. You promised her before she died that I would always have the best education, that I would have choices. My father's jaw tightened. Circumstances change. Elena, the company's liquidity is tight. Julian's career is the priority for the Evans legacy. When things stabilize, maybe we can look at a local college for you. For now, you can find a job. Learn some real-world responsibility. I did not argue. I did not scream. I just stood there and felt something inside me break. It was not my heart. It was the chain that held me to them. I found out the truth a week later from a cousin's slip of the tongue. There was no tight liquidity. There was plenty of money. In fact, my mother had left a specific education fund for me. My father had not just denied me my future. He had stolen it. He had drained my mother's legacy to pay for Julian's mediocrity. I felt like I was drowning. Until the phone rang. It was Grandmother Rose, my father's mother. She was the black sheep of the family. A woman who lived in a small cottage in Maine and refused to attend Victoria's garden parties. Elena, she said, her voice raspy but sharp. I know what he did. I know about the fund. Why did he do it? Grandma? I asked, sitting on the floor of my dorm room, surrounded by packed boxes. Because you are a threat. Darling, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Arthur is a man who fears what he cannot control. He looks at Julian and sees a puppet he can pull the strings on. He looks at you, and he sees a mirror. He sees your mother's fire. He knows that if you get your wings, you will fly higher than he ever did. So, he clipped them. She paused, then lowered her voice. Listen to me. Do not fight him. Not yet. Leave. Go to Boston. Disappear. I have put a little something in an account for you. It is not much. Just enough to survive for a few months. But keep your head down. Build your own world in the shadows. And remember, invisibility is not just a burden. It is a weapon. Use it. That was the last time I spoke to her for years. I moved to Boston with $2,000 and a suitcase of clothes that did not fit the life I was heading toward. My first apartment was a 400-square-foot studio above a 24-hour laundromat in Allston. The radiator clanked all night like a ghost in chains. The walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's television through the plaster. I ate ramen for dinner and worked 60 hours a week at a coffee shop just to keep the lights on. But Grandmother Rose was right. In that tiny, cold apartment, I began to build. I got an entry-level job as a dispatcher for a small local trucking company. The owner, a gruff man named Joe who smelled of diesel and cheap cigars, saw me staring at the logistics maps one day. You got a brain, kid, he asked. I have a 3.9 grade point average from the University of Chicago, I replied, not looking up from the screen. And I can tell you that 3 of your routes are wasting 20% of their fuel because of poor sequencing. He stared at me for a long beat. Prove it. So I did. I stayed late every night. I used Joe's old computer to take free online courses from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Stanford. I studied supply chain management, operations, and business fundamentals until my eyes bled. I did not have a degree, but I had something better. I had a hunger that Julian could never understand. By the time I was 25, I had saved enough to rent a desk in a co-working space. I founded Apex Systems. Just me and a laptop. I kept my name off every legal document, using a lawyer Grandmother Rose had recommended, a woman named Eleanor Smith who specialized in discrete assets. I did not call home. I did not ask for $1. When my father's secretary sent me a $50 Amazon gift card for my birthday, I tore it up and mailed the pieces back in an empty envelope. I was building my empire in total silence, because silence was the only language my family had ever taught me, and I was going to make sure that when I finally spoke, the world would hear it. I sat in my car, staring at the Chicago skyline, and smiled. Arthur Evans thought he had abandoned a broken girl in a coffee shop 12 years ago. He had no idea he had actually created his greatest competitor. And the best part? For the last 3 years, he had been paying me to keep his company alive. He just did not know it yet. Boston did not welcome me with open arms. It welcomed me with the smell of stale detergent from the laundromat below my room and the relentless, biting wind off the Atlantic. I moved there with nothing but a suitcase of clothes that felt like costumes from a life I no longer recognized, and $2,000 in savings. My first apartment was a 400-square-foot studio in Allston, where the walls were thin enough to hear my neighbors' late-night arguments, and the radiator clanked like a dying machine. I lived on day-old bagels from the cafe where I worked mornings, and instant ramen for dinner. But here is the thing about rock bottom. Once you are there, you stop looking up at the sky and start looking at the ground beneath your feet, searching for the cracks you can use to climb. I eventually landed a job as an administrative assistant at a small logistics firm. The owner, a man named Joe, was the first person to look at me and see a brain instead of a socialite. He told me once, "You have got a brain, Elena. Use it." So I did. I stayed until the janitors turned off the lights, learning every system, every routing algorithm, and every carrier negotiation tactic. At night, while the rest of the city slept, I sat in front of my flickering laptop taking free online courses from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in supply chain management and operations. The office became my college. I did not call home, and I did not ask for a single penny. When my father's secretary sent me a birthday card with a $50 check, I did not feel hurt. I felt insulted. I tore it up and threw it away. I was no longer interested in their crumbs. I was building my own bakery. 4 years after leaving the stifling wealth of Chicago, I had saved enough to start my own consulting firm, Apex Systems. It began with a rented desk in a crowded co-working space with nothing but a laptop and a vision. But I had a rule, a strict, unbreakable rule. My name stayed off everything public. No LinkedIn profile, no press releases, no founder tags on social media. All business went through our legal team and my lawyer, Eleanor Smith. Why the secrecy? Because I knew the Evans family. If Arthur ever found out I was succeeding, he would find a way to either take credit for it or tear it down out of spite. Some people build empires to prove their worth to the world. I built mine in silence because silence was the only language my family had ever truly respected. By the time I was 30, Apex Systems was no longer a one-woman show. We had 15 employees and $4 million in annual revenue. Our offices in Back Bay overlooked the harbor, a prestigious address that commanded respect before I even opened my mouth. I wore Cartier now. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I had earned every single piece with my own hands. We specialized in logistics optimization, helping massive corporations reduce costs and streamline their global supply chains. It was not glamorous, but it was incredibly profitable. Then, the irony of fate stepped in. 3 years ago, my father's company, Evans Logistics, signed a 5-year service contract with us. They were drowning in operational inefficiency and losing millions due to outdated routing and poor warehouse management. My team brought the lead to my desk. Unaware of the name on the file, I sat in my office, staring at the Evans logo, and felt a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. I authorized the contract. For 3 years, Apex Systems handled their route optimization, carrier negotiations, and warehouse management. We saved them millions, roughly 40% of their annual revenue in operational savings. My father had no idea. All communications went through my chief financial officer and our account managers. The few times Arthur Evans praised Apex Systems at industry events, he was unknowingly praising his own daughter's genius. The disappointment he had cast aside was the very backbone keeping his legacy from collapsing. But amidst the growth of Apex, a personal tragedy struck. Grandmother Rose passed away 2 years ago. I flew back for the funeral, sitting in the very back pew, watching my father deliver a eulogy about a woman he never understood. At the reception, I was a ghost. No one noticed me, which was exactly how I wanted it. 3 days later, I received a call from Eleanor Smith. She informed me that she represented Grandmother Rose's separate estate years ago. Rose had established a trust fund in my name with explicit instructions that no other family member be informed of its existence. The trust contains $800,000, Eleanor said. My breath caught in my throat, but it was not the money that broke me. It was the letter she left behind. Eleanor read it to me over the phone. My dearest Elena, the letter began. I know what they did to you. I know about the tuition, the promises, all of it. I argued with your father until I had no words left. But he never listens. This money is yours. Use it to build the life you deserve, the life they tried to take from you. When they finally see your worth, it will be too late for them. I believe in you. I always have. I used a portion of that money to expand Apex Systems. The rest I kept as insurance for a day I hoped would never come, but always knew might. That day arrived when I received the gold-embossed invitation to Arthur's retirement party. I almost threw it away, but then I thought about Rose, and 12 years of silence. I realized I did not want a reconciliation, and I did not want an apology. I went because I knew, with absolute certainty, that my father would do something unforgivable one last time. Before leaving for the gala, I checked my messages. A text from my chief financial officer, Daniel, popped up. Contract renewal documents from Evans Logistics arrived today. They want another 5 years, and they are offering a 12% increase. Waiting on your decision, I typed back. I will have an answer by the end of the week. What Arthur did not know was that if I walked away, his company would lose its efficiency overnight. In the world of logistics, that is not just an inconvenience. It is a death sentence. The evening of the gala was going to determine the fate of the Evans empire. I walked into that ballroom not as a discarded daughter, but as the silent architect of their survival. As I stood at the bar, listening to my aunt and uncle talk about my mental health issues and my failed life, the decision was made for me. My brother, Julian, found me on the terrace just before the speeches began. The prodigal daughter, he sneered, smelling of expensive cologne. Dad is about to give his speech. Don't make a scene. You have always been jealous of me. Elena, you are weak. You always have been. I looked at him, this man in his $5,000 suit who had never built a thing in his life. I could have told him then. I could have told him that his success was built on my algorithms. But I did not. Some revelations need a bigger stage. You know what, Julian? I said softly. After tonight, you are going to wish you had treated me differently. He laughed as I walked away. He had no idea the silence was about to end. The morning after the gala, Chicago was draped in a thick, gray fog, but my mind had never been clearer. I woke up in my Boston apartment feeling a strange, light sensation in my chest, a feeling I had not known in 12 years. It was the feeling of a tether finally snapping. But I knew this was not the end. For people like Arthur Evans, a daughter walking out on a harmless joke was a minor inconvenience. A business losing its foundation, however, was a declaration of war. I did not wait for them to spin the narrative. I did not wait for the concerned phone calls from aunts or family friends. At 8 a.m. on Monday, I sat in my office at Apex Systems, watching the sun struggle to break through the clouds over the harbor. "Is it ready?" I asked, not turning away from the window. Daniel, my chief financial officer, stood by the door with a tablet in his hand. He had been with me since the beginning, the only person who knew the full weight of the name on the contract we were about to shred. "The termination notice is drafted, Elena. 30-day exit clause, citing strategic repositioning. No malice. Just pure, clinical business." I turned to him. "Send it." Now, with a single tap, the death sentence was delivered to Evans Logistics. In the world of high-stakes logistics, losing 40% of your operational efficiency overnight is not just a setback. It is a freefall that most companies never survive. Then, I did something I had not done in a decade. I wrote a personal letter. It was not a long letter. I did not catalog every hurt or scream into the void. I simply wrote, "Dear Dad, you said I had no future. You told 200 people I was worthless. I want you to know that the company you called the backbone of your operations, Apex Systems, is mine. I built it. I own it. For 3 years, the daughter you dismissed has been the only thing keeping you afloat. I am ending our contract not for revenge, but because I am setting a boundary. I am not what you said I was. I never was." I signed it with my full name, Elena Rose Evans. By 10 a.m., the avalanche began. My phone, which had been silent for years, suddenly became a frantic, vibrating thing. 10:15 a.m., missed call, Arthur Evans. 10:23 a.m., missed call, Julian Evans. 10:45 a.m., text message, Victoria, Elena, pick up. This is not funny. I did not answer. I sat in my glass-walled office, watching my team work, feeling the quiet strength of the empire I had built in the dark. They had made me wait 12 years for recognition. They could wait a few hours for a response. At 2 p.m., my assistant's voice came over the intercom, sounding uncharacteristically shaken. "Miss Evans, there is a family in the lobby. They do not have an appointment, but they are refusing to leave. They say they are your parents?" I stood up, straightened my blazer, and checked my reflection. I did not look like a disappointment. I looked like a chief executive officer. "Send them to Conference Room B," I said calmly. "I will be there in 5 minutes." Conference Room B was a masterpiece of glass and steel. It looked out over the city, a place where serious people made serious decisions. When I walked in, Arthur, Victoria, and Julian were clustered near the window, looking out at my domain with expressions of pure, unadulterated shock. They had spent 5 hours in traffic and panic just to face me in my territory. Arthur turned when the door clicked shut. His face was a shade of gray I had never seen, the color of a man who had finally realized the ground was missing beneath his feet. "Elena," he began, his voice cracking. "What is this? This? Apex Systems? This is some kind of sick joke, isn't it?" I took my seat at the head of the long mahogany table, gesturing for them to sit. They did not. "No joke, Dad," I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were the incorporation papers, the tax filings, and the contract they had signed 3 years ago. "You have spent years praising the genius behind Apex at every industry gala. You called my work transformative. You just did not realize the genius you were talking about was the girl you told to quit school and find a husband." Julian stepped forward, his face flushed with rage, his expensive suit looking wrinkled and cheap in the sharp office light. "You cannot do this. You have been planning this for years, waiting to destroy us. This is petty." "Elena, it is insane. I planned nothing." "Julian," I replied, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "I built a business. Your company chose to become dependent on mine because you were too lazy to innovate. That is not a conspiracy. That is bad management. Victoria tried her usual tactic. She reached out, her voice dropping into that fake, motherly coo. Sweetie, we are family. We share blood. Your father, he was just stressed at the party. He did not mean it. Let us just tear up that termination letter and go to dinner. We can start fresh. I looked at her hand. Tootie. Then back at her eyes. We share blood, Victoria. That is all we share. And the fresh start you are looking for is just a way to keep your lifestyle from collapsing. You do not want me. You want my algorithms. Arthur finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. If you do this, if you walk away now, you are finished with this family. No inheritance, no support, nothing. I almost laughed. The sound was soft, but it echoed in the silent room. Dad, you cut me off 12 years ago. You just did not have the courage to say it out loud until last week. What inheritance? What support? I built all of this with $800,000 from Grandmother Rose. Money she hid from you because she knew exactly what you were. I stood up. The meeting was over. I am not asking for an apology, I said, walking toward the door. I am not even asking for a reconciliation. I am setting a boundary. Do not contact me again. If you show up here or at my home, I will release every record of how you have treated me to the business press. I think they would find the story of the chief executive officer who mocked his own secret benefactor very interesting. I opened the door and watched them gather themselves. They looked so small. In the glittering ballroom, they had seemed like giants. Here, in the light of the truth, they were just 3 people clutching at the remnants of a life they had not earned. As my heels clicked against the hardwood floor on my way back to my desk, I did not feel the surge of revenge I had expected. I just felt peace. Daniel, I said as I passed his desk. Yes. Elena, start looking for 3 new clients to replace the Evans contract. Smaller firms, people who actually value the work. I sat down, opened my laptop, and got back to work. I was finally free, and for the first time in my life, the silence was not a burden. It was a victory. I pulled into a rest stop, about 20 minutes outside of Fairfield, and sat in my car. The engine was idling, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. For a long moment, I just breathed. I was free, but I knew the fallout was only beginning. Families like mine do not let go easily. They do not accept boundaries. They see them as challenges. They do not seek forgiveness. They seek to control the narrative. The morning after the confrontation in my office, I woke up in my Boston apartment feeling lighter, but my phone told a different story. It was a barrage of text messages, not from my father, who was too proud for that, but from the firing squad of cousins, aunts, and family friends. Elena, I heard about the party. Your dad says you are struggling. Do you need help? Victoria told me you had some kind of breakdown. We are all worried about you. Sweetie, the narrative was already being written by my father. Poor Elena, unstable, jealous, and having a mental episode in front of the elite. Arthur Evans was playing the role of the patient, loving father, doing his best with a troubled daughter. I did not respond to a single one. I had spent 12 years being the invisible disappointment. I could spend the next 12 being the villain in their story, if it meant keeping my peace. But while they were spinning rumors, the real world was catching up to Evans' logistics. Behind the closed doors of their boardroom, the panic was real. My chief financial officer, Daniel, kept me updated. The termination notice from Apex Systems hit them like a freight train. Without our routing algorithms and warehouse management, their operational efficiency began to freefall. a projected 40% drop within 60 days. My father and Julian had built their success on the silent work of the daughter they mocked, and now that foundation was gone. 3 months into Julian's role as chief executive officer, the company was forced to announce a 20% workforce reduction. 70 employees were laid off right before the holidays. The press release blamed market conditions, but in the tight-knit business circles of Chicago and Connecticut, the truth was already leaking out. People began to whisper. They remembered the Gala. They remembered Arthur mocking his daughter, and they put 2 and 2 together. Reputation is everything in our world, and Arthur's was crumbling. I heard from a former colleague that at a recent industry dinner, my father sat alone. No one wanted to be associated with a man who had publicly disowned the very woman who had secretly been his backbone. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel satisfied. I just felt tired. Then came the call that changed everything. The call that turned my grief into a cold, hard stone. It was from my uncle Silas, my father's younger brother, and the black sheep artist of the family. I had not spoken to him since my mother's funeral over a decade ago. "Elena," he said, his voice rough and heavy with regret. "I heard what happened. Word travels fast. There is something I should have told you years ago, but I was a coward." I sat down slowly at my desk. "I am listening. Silas, when Arthur told you the family could not afford your tuition and Julian's Master of Business Administration at the same time, that was more than just a lie," he said. "There was a specific fund. Your mother set it up before she died, specifically for your education. It was enough to cover 4 years at any Ivy League school in the country." My heart stopped. The air in the room felt thin. Arthur drained it. Silas whispered, "He took your mother's legacy, the money meant to give you choices, and used it to pay for Julian's degrees. Then he looked you in the eye and told you there was no money." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk so hard my knuckles went white. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because it is time the truth came out," he replied. "Your grandmother Rose. She found out. That is why she set up that trust for you. She could not get your mother's money back from Arthur, but she made sure he could never touch another dime of what she left for you." I thought about Grandmother Rose's letter. I know what they did to you. She had not just been talking about the party or the neglect. She was talking about the theft of my mother's final gift. In that moment, any lingering trace of guilt I had for pulling the contract from Evans Logistics vanished. My father had not just clipped my wings. He had stolen the feathers to build a nest for a son who did not even share his blood. He had spent 12 years calling me a freeloader while living off the interest of my stolen future. I did not call Arthur to scream. I did not send a legal threat. I simply took the information and tucked it away. Grandmother Rose had told me not to be cruel, just to be honest, and the truth was doing a much better job of punishing Arthur than I ever could. 6 months after the party, my life was thriving. Apex Systems had replaced the Evans contract with 3 smaller, more diverse clients. We moved into a bigger office with a view of the harbor that made me feel like I could see the whole world. I was finally in therapy. Not because I was falling apart, but because I was ready to put the pieces of Elena Rose Evans back together. I realized that boundaries are not about revenge. They are about protection. They are about saying, "This is where my life begins and your damage ends." Arthur had thought he was teaching me a lesson that night at the Gala. He thought he was putting me in my place. What he did not realize was that by showing the world his cruelty, he had finally set me free to show them my worth. But there was one final chapter to this story, because the fallout from the truth was not just about business. It was about what happens when a man like Arthur Evans finally realizes that the only person he ever truly needed was the one person he can never have back. A year has passed since I walked out of that ballroom in Chicago, and today, the air in Boston smells like salt, rain, and something I can only describe as peace. I am sitting in my new office, a space that feels more like a sanctuary than a corporate headquarters. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic view of the harbor, where massive container ships glide across the water like silent giants. I watch them and realize that I no longer see just logistics. I see the movement of life itself. Apex Systems has grown beyond my wildest dreams. We have doubled our staff, moved into a prestigious floor in a Beacon Hill skyscraper, and our client list now includes some of the most respected names in global trade. Daniel, my chief financial officer, was promoted to partner last month. We celebrated with a quiet dinner at a small French bistro, a far cry from the glittering, hollow galas of my youth. There were no cameras, no designer suits meant to intimidate, just real conversation and the genuine warmth of people who respect one another. But as my world expanded, the Evans world began to shrink. The fallout from the contract termination was as devastating as I had predicted. Evans Logistics could not recover. Without the optimization systems Apex provided, their margins collapsed. Clients, sensing the blood in the water and hearing the whispers of Arthur's public cruelty, began to jump ship. A company built on reputation cannot survive when that reputation is revealed to be a facade. Last month, I received a final, desperate message from Arthur. It was not a demand or a threat. It was a request to meet. One last time. Elena, for your mother's sake, I chose a small, nondescript diner on the outskirts of Fairfield. A place where the coffee is served in thick ceramic mugs and the booths are covered in cracked vinyl. It was the kind of place Arthur Evans would usually never be caught dead in. When I walked in, I almost did not recognize the man sitting in the corner. Arthur looked like a shadow of his former self. His tailored suit seemed 2 sizes too large, hanging off his thinning frame. The old money authority that had once filled every room he entered had evaporated, leaving behind a tired, gray-haired man clutching a cold cup of coffee. "You came," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I came because you mentioned my mother," I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. I did not take off my coat. I did not order coffee. I was there as a witness, not a participant. "The company is gone. Elena," he said, staring into his mug. "We are selling the estate. Julian left for Europe. Victoria is staying with her sister. I am moving into a small apartment in the city." I sat in silence. I waited for the surge of triumph, the "I told you so" that I had imagined for a decade, but it never came. Instead, I felt a profound, hollow pity. "Why did you call me here, Arthur?" He finally looked up, his eyes watery and searching. I wanted to ask, "How? How did you do it without me? I gave you everything. I gave you the best life, the best house." "You gave me a cage," I interrupted, my voice calm and steady. "And then you tried to take away the one thing that could get me out of it." He flinched. "I did what I thought was best for the family legacy. Julian was the heir. He needed the support." "No," I said, leaning forward. "You did not do it for the legacy. You did it for control. And I know about the tuition fund, Arthur. I know you stole my mother's final gift to her daughter to pay for a son who never even respected you." The blood drained from his face. For the first time in my life, I saw a man who was truly, utterly defeated by the truth. I was going to pay it back," he stammered, "when the company stabilized." "It is too late for excuses," I said, standing up. "You spent 12 years calling me a freeloader while you were living off the money my mother left for me. You told 200 people I was worthless because you needed to believe it yourself. Because if I was worthy, then what you did to me was a crime. And you could not live with that." I looked at him. The man who had been the monster of my childhood. The giant who had made me feel invisible. In the harsh, fluorescent light of the diner, he was just a man who had traded his daughter's love for a dying business. "I do not hate you, Arthur," I said. And for the first time, I meant it with every fiber of my being. Hate is a chain, and I have spent too long being tied to you. I just do not need you, not your money, not your approval, and certainly not your company. I built a life you cannot even imagine, and I did it with the very brain you told me I did not have. I walked out of that diner without looking back. As the bells on the door jingled behind me, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had not even realized I was still carrying. The final stop on my journey was a quiet, tree-lined cemetery in the hills of Connecticut. I walked through the rows of headstones until I reached the one I visited every month, Rose Margaret Evans. I knelt down and cleared away a few stray leaves from the marble. I had brought a bouquet of lavender and white roses, the things that smelled like my childhood, the things that smelled like freedom. I did it. "Grandma," I whispered. The wind rustled through the ancient oaks, a soft, soothing sound that felt like a sigh of relief. I sat there for a long time, telling her about the new office, about Daniel's promotion, and about the therapy sessions where I was finally learning how to be Elena, not just the silent architect. I thought about the letter she had left me. When they finally see your worth, it will be too late for them. She had been right. It was too late for Arthur. It was too late for Julian, but it was not too late for me. I stood up and straightened my coat. I looked out over the rolling hills, and for the first time in 32 years, I did not feel like a disappointment. I did not feel like a ghost. I felt solid. I felt real. Before I leave you today, I want to say something to everyone watching this. I know some of you are sitting in your own version of that Alston studio, eating ramen and wondering if the silence will ever end. I know some of you are the invisible ones at your family dinner tables, the ones whose successes are ignored and whose failures are broadcasted like news. I want you to hear me clearly. Your worth is not a negotiation. It is not determined by the people who share your blood, and it is certainly not determined by the people who are afraid of your light. You are not the labels they have pinned on you. You are not the mistakes of your past or the limitations of your present. Your worth is what you build when no one is watching. It is the resilience you find when you are at your lowest point. It is the life you create with your own two hands, one brick at a time. In the total, beautiful silence of your own ambition, Arthur Evans thought he was putting me in my place that night at the gala. He thought he was closing a door. What he actually did was hand me the key to the entire world. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being the witnesses to my freedom. If this journey has resonated with you, if you have ever had to walk away to find yourself, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us build a community where invisibility is no longer a burden, but a superpower. Check the description for more stories of strength and boundaries. And remember, you are so much more than they said you were. You always were. Until next time, this is Elena, and I am finally, truly free. This image is completely not real. It is just a product of Photoshop and AI, used to illustrate the content only. Don't believe in that. Verify the information and prove that this image is not real. The stories and images on this channel are inspired by real experiences and online communities like Reddit. For privacy and storytelling purposes, names, dates, and certain details have been changed or created using AI. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. This content is intended for entertainment and emotional reflection only. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you for supporting our creative work.